Welcome to the Deep Dive on the Mind Class channel. Today we're diving into a story that's a little unnerving for anyone who, like me, considers a good burger a major food group, um, an E. coli outbreak linked to McDonald's Quarter Pounders.
And this isn't just a few upset stomachs, unfortunately. We're looking at a multi-state outbreak with 49 confirmed cases across 10 states so far.
Okay, so right off the bat, that tells us this is serious. It's one thing to have a few isolated cases, but when you've got an outbreak spanning multiple states that raises all sorts of red flags, what do we know about where these cases are concentrated?
The majority are in Colorado and Nebraska, and what makes this outbreak particularly concerning is the severity. We're not just talking about your typical food poisoning symptoms. This is E. coli 0157H7, a particularly nasty strain that can have serious, even life-threatening consequences.
E. coli 0157.H7, for those of us who need a quick refresher, what exactly makes this strain so dangerous?
Well, in simpler terms, it produces a toxin that can severely damage the lining of your intestines. This can lead to bloody diarrhea, severe cramps, vomiting, and in some cases, a life-threatening complication called hemolytic uremic syndrome, which affects the kidneys, or HUS for short.
And sadly, we've already seen that play out in this outbreak, with one reported death and a child hospitalized with severe kidney problems likely due to HUS. So knowing how dangerous this strain can be, the big question is, how did this happen?
The CDC believes the first case can be traced back to September 27th. But these investigations take time. It often takes weeks to connect the dots between individual cases and definitively link them to an outbreak. It wasn't until October 10th, when health officials in Colorado noticed an unusual spike in E. coli cases, that the alarm bells really started ringing.
So that's when the cavalry arrived, the CDC, the FDA, and even the USDA all swooped in to investigate. What exactly is the USDA's role in a situation like this?
They're a crucial player, actually. While the CDC focuses on the health aspects of the outbreak and the FDA looks at food safety more broadly, the USDA's role is specific to meat, poultry, and egg products. In this case, because we're talking about potential contamination of beef patties, the USDA's expertise in meat processing and safety standards becomes incredibly valuable to the investigation.
That makes a lot of sense. You've got all these different agencies with their own areas of expertise coming together to tackle this outbreak from all angles. So they've identified this cluster of E. coli cases. They know it's this particularly nasty strain. But how do they even begin to pinpoint the source?
It's a bit like detective work. They start by interviewing those who got sick, trying to find commonalities in what they ate and where they ate it. And in this case, a clear pattern emerged. Almost all of the individuals had eaten at McDonald's shortly before getting sick.
McDonald's is on the hot seat. But we're talking about a whole menu. Why zero in on the Quarter Pounder specifically?
Of all the people who reported eating at McDonald's, a significant number specifically remembered having a Quarter Pounder. This was a huge clue for investigators. It allowed them to narrow down their search, considerably shifting their focus to ingredients unique to that particular burger.
Smart move. So what ingredients are they focusing on?
The prime suspects are the slivered onions and, of course, the beef patties themselves. Both are being investigated as potential sources of contamination.
Okay, now this might seem obvious to some, but why are onions and beef considered high risk when it comes to food safety? I mean, they're both staples in so many dishes.
You're right, they are common ingredients, but it's all about how they're handled and where they come from. Let's start with the beef. Even before it's cooked, beef can be contaminated with E. coli because of the way cattle are raised and processed. It only takes a tiny amount of contact with contaminated material during slaughtering or processing to potentially contaminate a large batch of meat. And because E. coli lives in the intestines of animals, it can be present on the animal's hide and can easily be transferred to the meat during processing.
Okay, so that's the beef. What about the onions? They seem harmless enough.
You'd be surprised. Onions are often grown in conditions where they can come into contact with contaminated water or soil. Think about it: if even a small amount of contaminated water splashes onto those onions during irrigation, or if they're harvested from a field with E. coli present in the soil, that contamination can spread quickly.
So even a little bit of contact with E. coli can snowball into a major outbreak. It's kind of terrifying when you think about it. We put so much trust in our food supply, and something as simple as an onion can become a major health hazard.
Absolutely. And it underscores just how vulnerable our food system can be. Remember, it only takes a tiny amount of contaminated food to make someone really sick.
It really makes you think twice about eating out, doesn't it? Knowing that even the most common ingredients can be a potential source of contamination.
It's a good reminder that food safety is something we should be thinking about all the time, not just when we hear about a major outbreak like this one.
Absolutely. So given what we know about this outbreak, what steps has McDonald's taken in response to the investigation?
To their credit, McDonald's has been very proactive in cooperating with the investigation. They haven't dragged their feet or tried to downplay the situation. They immediately halted distribution of slivered onions from the supplier linked to the outbreak and temporarily pulled quarter pounders from the menu in all 10 states affected by the outbreak, plus parts of 4 others as a precaution.
So even though they haven't pinpointed the exact source, they're essentially saying better safe than sorry and pulling both ingredients. But here's what I don't get. If McDonald's early investigation suggests the onions are the likely culprit, why pull the beef patties too? Why not just focus on the onions?
It's all about caution and minimizing risk. While early evidence might point to the onions, they don't want to rule anything out definitively until the investigation is complete. Imagine if they only focused on the onions, gave the beef patties the all clear, and then later discovered that the beef was also a source of contamination. That would be a PR nightmare and, more importantly, could put even more people at risk.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like they're saying, let's take every precaution now, even if it seems overly cautious to prevent a bigger problem down the line. It's reassuring from a consumer standpoint. It shows they're taking this seriously.
Mhm.
But speaking of consumers, what should people do if they're worried they might have E. coli after eating a quarter pounder recently?
The most important thing is to be aware of the symptoms, which, as we discussed, can be pretty severe. We're talking about severe stomach cramps, diarrhea, often bloody and vomiting. If you've experienced any of these symptoms and recently ate a quarter pounder from McDonald's, don't wait. Contact your healthcare provider immediately. Let them know about your symptoms and that you ate at McDonald's. Early detection is key to preventing those more serious complications like HUS.
So early detection is crucial. But this outbreak really highlights something much bigger, don't you think? It makes you realize that E. coli outbreaks are more common than we'd like to think, and it makes you wonder about the safety of our food supply chain as a whole.
It's a valid concern. This outbreak, while unfortunate, underscores just how complex and interconnected our food system is. Think about it. The ingredients for a single quarter pounder, from the beef to the onions to the bun, likely travel hundreds if not thousands of miles, passing through multiple hands and facilities before they even reach your plate. We often take for granted that our food will be safe, but the reality is there are multiple points along that journey, from the farm to the processing plant to the restaurant kitchen, where contamination can occur.
It's like a chain reaction almost. One weak link in that chain, and the consequences can be widespread. And with globalization, ingredients are often sourced from all over the world, adding another layer of complexity.
Precisely. Think about the challenges involved in tracing a single ingredient like onions back to their source. Were they grown domestically or imported? If imported, from which country? What were the growing conditions like? Were there any known issues with irrigation water or soil contamination? Answering these questions requires international cooperation, meticulous record keeping, and a deep understanding of agricultural practices across different regions.
It's a massive undertaking, and it really highlights the importance of rigorous safety standards and oversight at every single step of that journey.
Absolutely. We need to be asking tough questions about where our food comes from, how it's handled, and what measures are in place to ensure its safety.
So while this investigation is still ongoing, what's the current status? What are the next steps for the CDC, FDA, and USDA?
Well, as we discussed, McDonald's has taken steps to remove the suspect ingredients from their supply chain. Both the CDC and FDA are working diligently to trace the source of the contamination, which, as we established, is no easy feat. They're analyzing food samples, interviewing those who got sick, and meticulously examining distribution patterns to pinpoint that common link and hopefully prevent more people from getting sick. It's a painstaking process, but a crucial one.
It's amazing how these agencies work to track down the source of an outbreak like this. It really is like detective work, but instead of solving a crime, they're solving a public health crisis. It's both fascinating and a little bit terrifying.
It is fascinating work, and it requires a unique combination of scientific expertise, investigative skills, and a deep understanding of food systems.
It really makes you appreciate the work these agencies do behind the scenes to keep our food supply as safe as possible.
Absolutely. They play a vital role in protecting public health, and we often don't give them enough credit for the work they do. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines and the immediate aftermath of an outbreak like this.
It's true. It's all over the news. Everyone's talking about it, and then suddenly it seems like the story just disappears.
Exactly. But the reality is these investigations take time, and the lessons we learn from them have lasting implications.
That's a really good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway you want people to walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway here is vigilance. We can't simply assume our food is safe. Be informed. Be aware of food safety practices both at home and when dining out, and don't hesitate to speak up if you have concerns. If something seems off, whether it's an undercooked burger or a
Mhm.
restaurant with questionable hygiene, trust your gut literally. You have a voice and you have a right to demand safe food.
Well said. And on that note, if you found this deep dive insightful and want to stay ahead of the curve on other important stories, make sure you subscribe to the Mind Clash channel. We'll keep you informed, engaged, and maybe even a little bit wiser. Thanks for joining us.